We are live. This is your boy, Sarm Hotep. Sorry for those who were on time the first time. For some reason, the broadcast would not start. And this is our second try. If it doesn't work this time, then, I don't know what to say. Everyone's just going to have to catch the archive. But as I was stating previously, I just came off of this is the tail end of the weekend for the Sheikh Anta Diop conference here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is where a lot of African-centered scholars in various different disciplines, come to share their latest research. And we convene, we network, we bring students, we dialogue, we purchase books and other, things from vendors. It's just a cool place to be. And, I had a real good time. And this is probably like my 5th or 6th year, in a row going, so it's really enjoyable. And let me do a test first before I continue. It says live. Let me see if y'all can see it. I'm going to ask the people in the chat, can you see us live? Say something.
It's there.
Huh?
Everything is cool. Everything is up.
It's live, Let's see, can you see us live? Someone says they're docking our pay. I take that criticism, but yeah, so this year my presentation is titled "A Linguistic Assessment of Maat and Its Usage in Modern African Communities of Memory." And normally we get 20 minutes to speak, but because of the concentration of scholars this year, in the limited time, we actually had to reduce our time. So I didn't get to, fully complete my presentation. I don't think I was going to anyway, but I decided to, for those who didn't attend the conference, to still see at least my presentation, because normally what I'll do is I'll record it and then just upload it to YouTube. And so I didn't record it this time. So I wanted the general public to be able to assess my presentation and critique it. And I should say that what I'm presenting is just a tad bit of a larger article, which the larger article itself, about 25 pages, is part of a larger work on the god Ra and the goddess Maat in ancient Egypt that I am currently working on, which I hope to be completed in 2017. Now, when it'll be released, I can't tell you. But so this is only a snippet. This is only a little bit of what's going down in those particular works. And so, but before we move on, I just want to, first shout out all of you who are in the audience listening live and in the chat room, living it up. And for my guests who are on the panel right now, who will, give some feedback regarding, what I say in this particular lecture. So seems as our good brother Sanjetti is having technical difficulties. We can't hear him, but we can at least see his avatar, and he's dropped out, so he'll probably be back in later. But we have with us brother Wujawu from the Seshmeta Netcher group, and brother Nahisi from the Mosi Warrior clan. Just, unmute your mics and introduce yourselves and say hello to the people.
All right, I'd like to say Hotep, and I'm just going to sit back and watch the presentation. This is something that I'm excited to see what you found about Maat. And you know, afterwards, I'm definitely going to hit you with a bunch of questions as we always do. And yeah, so thanks for having me on the panel. Sit back and watch. And what's up to everybody who's watching?
All right, appreciate it.
Hotep, the brother Nahisi, it's an honor that you invited me to hear your presentation. I'm going to sit back and learn something and ask some questions at the end. I appreciate it.
No doubt, no doubt. I see in the chat room an individuals, you know, asking for the entire for the entire article. Normally, I would just release the article probably on my academia.edu page. However, this year for the Shekant Diop conference, they're actually going to select some of the papers and they're going to put it in a book. And so if my paper is selected, then it'll be in the book. If it doesn't get selected, then I'll just probably release it, you know, to the public via academia.edu. So, you know, the article itself will, you know, eventually be public, but I didn't want y'all to wait that long because that could be a long process in of itself in terms of going back and forth with editing and things of that nature. So y'all can at least know what is in the pipeline so y'all can anticipate, you know, the larger work itself. So I do appreciate, you know, that question. And, you know, I apologize that the article is not fully available for you to assess. So with that said, I actually have two screens going on right now because the one where you can see me moving is the Ubuntu operating system. You know, I got to work off of the African operating systems. However, it does not have Microsoft. It doesn't, you know, really utilize Microsoft products really well. And they have an equivalent for Microsoft PowerPoint, but it tends to do some weird stuff to my text and images. So instead of battling that until I figure that out, I just decided to, you know, use my other laptop over here for my assessment, for my presentation, and then y'all can hear me verbally, you know, via here. So I'm about to get started, you know, right now. So I'm gonna switch screens. You guys in the audience, let me know if you can see the screen fully, because I can't see anything. And once I get confirmation,
yes, it's up full screen.
That they can see it.
On the public side.
Okay. You can see it on the public side?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, again, thanks again for joining. I'm going to do this like I did, you know, I have my little pointer. Dang, y'all can't see the pointer laser. That's all right. We're going to keep it moving. Because a presentation is not a presentation without the pointer laser. So for all you future people doing presentations. Anyway, so as I said earlier, the title of the presentation is A Linguistic Assessment of Maat and Its Usage in Modern African Communities of Memory. And for those who don't know what Maat is, it's a term in the ancient Egyptian language. So I'm just going to read now my abstract. And so this is the abstract for the article. So this paper utilizes the analytic tool of historical comparative linguistics to explicate a more accurate and richer understanding of the ancient Kemetic ethical principle known as Ma'at, truth, justice, reciprocity, and righteousness, by examining its lexical cognates among the modern African languages. Ma'at, as a term and principle, survives among many African populations whose languages belong to the Negro Egyptian language family. We discovered that not only does the lexeme survive in modern African languages, but it exists as an operative social system by which many indigenous African societies are organized around and live by. This allows the researcher to gain insight into how Ma'at was probably understood as and operationalized within ancient Kemetic society. Moreover, This study allows us to develop a framework by which the African diaspora can organize its communities in alignment with the themes as constructed by Negro Egyptian speakers throughout the millennia. Therefore, to get a better understanding of this ancient code of ethics, we explore the living principle of Maat among 3 modern African societies. Therefore, the Bakongo, the Bassa out in Cameroon, and the Kalenjin of Kenya, as well as its linguistic cognates within the respective speech communities. Therefore, Kininga, Mbongi, Mbog, and Maat or Mat, respectively. Finally, we argue that Maat survives as a living principle in the diaspora among African Americans, for which the author, who is I, has given the principle a name from a living African language that is cognate with the word Maat in ancient Kemet or in ancient Kemet. Therefore, Bolingo, which means love, in the Shango language of Central African Republic. So, given the time and and space of this lecture, I will not deal with all 3 cultural zones. What I'm going to focus on is the Cameroonian, the Bassa people, and to find out what Maat is in among the Bassa people. So to get insight into the Kalenjin and the Bakongo, you will have to just read the article when it comes out in full. So we're going to move on. So I want to really set a framework for how I got to this point. And so in 1963, a linguist by the name of Joseph Greenberg wrote a text in which he organized African languages into 4 language phyla. The names for these 4 phyla are Niger-Congo, Khoisan, Nilo-Saharan, and Afro-Asiatic. As time progressed and a few linguists was assessing his methodology for the grouping of these languages, they found a number of flaws that were fundamental to the integrity of his argument. And one of those scholars was named, or is named, Dr. Theophile Obinga, who is from the Congo. And he, even since 1974, has vehemently argued against the validity and the existence of Afroasiatic as a language phyla. The reason being is because when we do a linguistic assessment of languages that exist outside of the so-called Afroasiatic language phyla, we find these non-accidental correspondences that inform us that these languages, for example, certain languages in so-called Niger-Congo are related fundamentally to certain languages in so-called Afroasiatic, and especially with ancient Egyptian. And so this evidence forces us to rethink the relationships between these African languages. There was an added layer of difficulty with Afroasiatic, given the fact that the languages that belong to Afroasiatic, the vast majority of them are only found on the African continent. There is one branch that exists outside of the African continent, and that is the Semitic languages. However, Greenberg made the argument that the Afroasiatic originated in Asia and then moved into Africa and was adopted by black people. He argued that the Berbers, the ancient Egyptians, and the Semitic speakers were all Caucasian people, and that these are the original Afroasiatic speakers who these other Chadic and Omotic, I should say, language families, for example, adopted the Afroasiatic languages. And I can hear you now, Brother Sanjetti. Welcome to the program. So this caused another, layer, of issues with Afroasiatic and the theories which govern these 4 language files. So, working diligently, Theophilo Obenga created a text in 1993 which put forth his fundamental thesis that ancient Egyptian was in fact related to all of these other languages that existed outside of these so-called established borders, these linguistic borders. And what he proposed is that there is really one fundamental family, for which all of these languages are related. And that he labeled this new this new language family, Negro-Egyptian. Now, the word Negro, or Negro, as we would say, does not have the negative connotations that it does in English, because it's just the French word for black. That's just how they say black. Same thing with Spanish, just the Romance word for black. So what he's saying is that this language family consists of black, people, and he wanted to emphasize the black in these African languages. So it was a political move. However, the science behind the formation of Negro-Egyptian is not anything political. It's just based on scientific data. So there's a political component and a non-political component, which is scientific, based on the linguistics, historical comparative linguistic methods. However, there was a few shortcomings of Theophilo Obenga's book. And the major thing is that he didn't stick to a core number of languages and he didn't go through the process of reconstructing Negro-Egyptian. He provided the evidence that the larger family existed. However, he did not go through the step-by-step process that allowed for us to say definitively that Negro-Egyptian is in fact a language family. So a number of years later, on your screen, you would see this individual linguist by the name of Jean-Claude Mboli. Now, he took it upon himself to study heavily linguistics and the comparative method. He's an electrical engineer, but he has went through the necessary stages to understand historical comparative linguistics and the fundamental arguments that were at play. And he put together a magnificent work called The Origin of African Languages, or Origine de Langues Africaines. It's written entirely in French. And so I have come across this text a number of years ago, read it thoroughly, and was very impressed by this particular text because it reaffirmed many ideas that I had discovered independently of him as a result of my engagement with ancient Egyptian language and Bantu languages. And so he put together a framework by which I could better assess what it is that I was discovering and looking at in my own research. So fast forward to today, I'm using an idea that was discovered as a result of his analysis and applying it to the assessment of the word Maat in ancient Egypt. Now, he has an assessment in his text on Maat, but we will see in this presentation that me and him differ very significantly on the origins and the meanings, fundamental meanings that gave rise to the word Maat. So he connects it to speech, but I connect it to something different. And so just want to put that out there. So with that said, I want to cite Dr. James P. Allen, who wrote a text called the Ancient Egyptian Pyramid Text, 2005. On page 13, he says that the Egyptian language is rich in allegory and metaphor, but relatively poor in vocabulary. This is one of those things that I realized when I first delved into the meta-nature on a serious note, for real serious and comparative studies, because I was finding that I'm finding the same word over and over again, just a different variety of it, and that a lot of these words could be traced to words for body parts. And I was already on that plane because of some earlier work I was studying under Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn, who has done some significant work in the comparison of Sumerian and Niger-Congo, so-called Niger-Congo languages, especially Bantu. And so with him and then some other folks, I started getting into the science, the linguistic science of semantics, the study of semantics. And this helped me to realize, once I started engaging Egyptian, that it's really not that many words in the language, in that it fundamentally is a monosyllabic language that is concatenating various words to expand its vocabulary applications. But fundamentally, it is a very limited in terms of fundamental words, irrespective of the borrowings into the language. And so we'll see throughout this presentation just what I mean, and how Mboli's work in many respects reinforces this notion. So again, our focus is on the term and even the goddess Maat. One of the things that in my comparative studies with Bantu, I essentially made the argument that when we say Maat, that at least historically, fundamentally, it was not pronounced Maat, because we put two A's in between the consonants M as in Mary and T as in Terrence. But if you can see my mouse right here, this is how we transliterate the word Maat in Egyptological work. But we discover that these two consonants here are not vowels. And a lot of people treat them as vowels, but they're not vowels. These are consonants. And I should note, for those who are unfamiliar with the ancient Egyptian language, that to our knowledge, they did not write out their vowels, that these are fundamentally consonants, consonants and semi-consonants that you are seeing, represented by the various glyphs. So this isn't Maat. What we have here is an M, an R, which is the nasalized volar trill here. And I argue it is a K value here, or some kind of velar. Mboli argues that it's an H and an I in certain circumstances. And then the last consonant, which is T right here. So it gives us the consonant sequence of M, R, K, T, or if we go by Mboli, M, R, H, T. And so for our purposes here, we're going to go with this consonant sequence, and it will give you the fundamental sound cluster that we find in the word market in English. So this is what we say here. We could say merakit, you know, marakit. I couldn't tell you, but these are the fundamental consonants for this term, and we'll see just, you know, how that is later on. But Maat is a term that is assumed to be very polytheistic, not polytheistic, polysemic, meaning that it has multiple meanings. And so we usually say that it means truth, justice, straightness, balance, and order. Well, what I've come to discover in my analysis is that Ma'at is really several different words with different meanings, where in some of them, their meanings appear to coincide and relate on very fundamental levels. And so we see that the ancient Egyptians creatively synthesized Maat in various different ways. And one of the ways in which they synthesized her, is they personified the principle. And in the physical representation of Maat, we see very fundamental characteristics. So in this depiction here of Maat, we see her with outstretched arms and with wings. We will get into why that is significant in a little bit. And also the feather of Maat, which is an ostrich feather. I will be providing an answer for why she is associated with the ostrich feather. So there's some other icons associated with her, and hopefully we can get that in as well. So we're going to be moving on now. So this is just to reinforce what I was saying earlier in terms of the grapheme. I should first go back a little bit and see. This is at least one way to write. If you can see where my mouse is in the lower lower left corner, you can see one rendering of the word Maat here. But this glyph here is what we call not bisyllable, but it's a biconsonantal glyph, because it represents two consonants in sequence, or we say a biliteral, and then it's followed by two monoliteral, single literal glyphs. So this biliteral glyph here is it represents the M, and what we call it, and we transliterate it as a capital A, but it's an M in the nasalized volar trill R. So it's like a mer, sequence, so to speak. And this arm right here represents that K or H value that I mentioned earlier, and then it's followed by the feminine T suffix. And so it's M, R, and then K, and then T, and this is the determinative of the goddess Maat, and we can tell it's her because of that ostrich feather right at the top. So I'm not sure how clear that actually shows up on your screens. Hopefully, I would advise everyone to expand your screens to full screen so you can really kind of see these terms and stuff that I'm using, if they're smaller than average. So going back, just showing you that other times Maat will be written with this glyph over here. And so this is the nasalized volar trill I was talking about earlier, a nasalized R, and then this value here, which I argue historically was P. And then some proposals for this in some other scientific works. So I'll keep it moving. Now, when we say Maat, we get that because people have analyzed the Coptic language, and in Coptic it is pronounced like Mai or Mei in various different formats. And then some other languages, when we look at the cognates for Maat, we have a similar pronunciation. Remember, the T in Maat is a suffix, and not all variations of Maat have the T. So a lot of these other languages don't have that grammatical feature. So this comes from, what you're seeing on the screen now is from Dr. Alan Anselin's article the words of Geno, Fulani, Cushitic, Nilotic, and Ancient Egyptian. And so we see these different variations of this word, which he reconstructs for Eastern Cushitic, Ma, which means good and sweet. Northern Omatic, Ma'at, in terms of that reconstruction. But in the kingdom of Jinjero, they say Ma'e, Mekeh, to be good, to be right. Proto-Boni, Ma'a, sweet, gentle. In the Berir, I don't even know how to pronounce that correctly, but I'll say Bariri. Somebody can inform me later how it's pronounced. Ma'a, in Fulani, demonstrates the palatalization of the glottal stop, in Adamawa. Mo, and there's some glottal stop sounds, I can't pronounce it. And, then Moi, be good, be filled, thanks, mercy, blessings. Moi, Moyere, Moi, or Moye, Moyugo, Muugo, goodness. In Wolof, they have Me, for to give or to offer, and then Meji, grace, aptitude. All of these fall within the range of what we understand the word Maat to mean. And so in the paper, I give more examples from other scholars who have looked at this question. But I want to show y'all where we're getting this pronunciation of Ma and Maat from. It's because people are looking at Coptic. Well, one of the arguments from Mboli is that Coptic and Middle Egyptian are two separate languages. And so I'm not dealing with Coptic at this point. I'm dealing with Middle Egyptian and primarily Bantu languages, because they cluster together closer than they do with the Coptic language. And so if I want to get to the heart of the pronunciation and meaning in Middle Egyptian, for me, as a strategy, I deal with Bantu, since Bantu is more conservative in their language, and they really hold on to many of the old Negro Egyptian structure and pronunciations. So this is why I'm dealing with the Bantu, here. So here's one representation or one argument for a possible meaning and derivation for Maat. And so Karinga wrote an excellent text called Maat, the Moral Ideal of Ancient Egypt. And in that text, he, on page 6, he says that he posits that the etymology of the word Maat suggests an evolution from a physical concept of straightness, evenness, levelness, correctness, as the wedge-shaped glyph suggests, to a general concept of rightness, including the ontological and ethical sense of truth, justice, righteousness, order, in a word, the rightness of things. And so when we look at these Bantu languages for a word meaning straight, in line, we find a different pronunciation than what we're used to. But when we compare it with the consonants in ancient Egyptian, we find that they align up perfectly. So in Kikongo, for example, they say in longa, line, row, file, a swarm of driver ants on the march, a troop, swarm, train of people filing along. In Kikuyu, they say runga. Notice that they don't have that N prefix, and it means to straighten or straighten. In Chiluba Bantu, a language that I like to use a lot, they say mulongo or mulongu, rank, roll, line, series, many. And we're seeing here that the M in Maat is really a prefix, and that the nasalized or velar trill, this grapheme right here, corresponds to L and R in the Bantu languages. And that K sound that I mentioned earlier, that H, that corresponds with NG, G, and K in Bantu languages. But as a result of this study, there's actually a lot more examples than what I'm showing here. I'm just trying to keep it digestible for you as you're looking at this. Again, the paper in full will have the full list of cognates where you can see it. So, but it also is inherited in the Proto-Indo-European languages as the word regs, and it means to move in a straight line, also to rule, to lead straight, to put right. It's in our English words, the actual word right. R-I-G is the root of the word right. And regulate, and regular, and regal, and correct, and royal, and in the feminine name Regina. You know, all of these have the root that is in the word Maat. So when you say right, like, you know, you tell your child you better act right, you're telling your child to act Maat. You know, to get straight, get your act straight. You know, and so this is where this kind of idea comes from. And so, but this journey with Maat actually started with a text from one of our great scholars out of the Congo, Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo. And in many of his texts, he would cite as a cognate for Maat in his native Chiluba Bantu language as Malelela or Malela, and some other variations of the same word. When I looked into it, he doesn't give a breakdown of the word, however. And so when I started looking in the Chiluba dictionaries and some other works, we come to discover that that word, you know, Malelela or Bulelela, meaning reality and truth, actually comes from this root here, Lelelela or Lelelele. And it has some tones in it. I'm not saying the tones correctly. So for all of you native Chiluba speakers, and I'm murdering your language, you know, please forgive me. But this lele here is actually a reduplication with an additional le, and this is actually, these are two different suffixes. That final L and E and that final L and A. And so Chiluba Bantu has been very good to me when discussing, when comparing words with the ancient Egyptian. Because when I look at Chiluba Bantu and I know the roots in the language, every single time that I go into ancient Egyptian, I find the same root to the word. So my strategy was, okay, if this is the root, I bet you I can find in ancient Egyptian that same root with the same meaning. And that is exactly the case. So what you find in Egyptian is riri. Remember that, I don't know if I do it in this lecture, but in the article I demonstrate in Egyptian that nasal azuvular trill and the letter R, this R here, they interchange in the language. And we may see a little bit of that. And so for them, it's riri. And so it's reduplicated just like it is in Chiluba Bantu. However, Chiluba Bantu adds another suffix to it that the Egyptian doesn't. And so this on the right-hand side is how you would write it in the hieroglyphs, riri, or ray, riri, whatever. And it means really and truly. Lele, lala means truth, authentic, veritable. Now, in the Setswana Bantu language, their word for truly matches exactly what we find in Middle Egyptian. So they say ruri, which means truly. So it's an exact match. We also have in the Yoruba language, they say ododo or otito. And so we can demonstrate that, you know, the Yoruba D's and T's correspond with the D's and L's in Bantu. And some of the L's have turned into R in Bantu, as we see in Setswana, you know, here. So these are all cognates. So ododo otito goes fully with it. It means exactly what we see in Egyptian. Truth, fact, justice, equality, right, righteousness. So that's their cognate for Maat. Ododo otito. Hold on. My screen, my other screen here is acting up. Okay, so I'm back. So we can see on this bottom half here some other variations of the word in these Bantu languages. And so in Chiluba again, remember that this here is a K sound. A variant of malele la, bulele la is sialeka, saleke, truth, reality. These are all the same word from same root. And so they replace the B and the M prefix with sia. In Basa, one of the groups that we'll be looking at today, they say malega, truth. And we can see that these consonants, pay attention to the consonants. The consonants is what we look at first when examining to see if it matches in form and meaning. And so, I should say off the back that these forms have been verified in other different ways. So I'm just showing you some conclusions, but there's actually an extra step that we have to do in order to make this argument that I'm making. And so we're going to skip that for the sake of time. You'll just have to see it in the article. But trust me when I say that these are cognates. And so in Zande language, they say Ringo, but they don't have that M prefix in the Zande language, and the same thing in Somali. So in Somali, they say Roon. They lost the G, which is the voice velar. But in Kikongo, the M is an N sound. And I argue that the N is actually original. So Kikongo has the more original pronunciation, which is in Lungu, justification, the state of being just, justice, righteousness, blameless, completeness. Lunga, without the prefix, be accurate, right, be exact, perfect. Isizulu, Lunga, become right, good, and accurate. Excuse me, accuracy is Utulunga. So you see that there's these different prefixes, onto this fundamental root here. And we're going to discover that even this K right here in Maat is actually a suffix. This is going to be the root. And we may be getting to that soon. So in ancient Egyptian, there's actually other variations of the word Maat with and without prefixes. And one of those is this word rouge, which you see at the bottom here, rouge in ancient Egyptian. It means to make secure, to set right a wrong, provide, fulfill a contract, to restore, to repair, to make new again, to make, grow, and flourish. And this concept of repair, make new again, to restore, all of this has to deal with to put in order. And in the larger work on Maat and Ra, I deal with all of that and show you the linguistics for that. But this word here at the top is aluja. It's also the title of one of my books that I published in 2013. But it means to make, provide, to retrace one step, to refer to a place of origin, and to restore. And it's kind of like to restore order. And so just giving you that as some added value. So now we're getting back to Mboli. And so this slide right here actually comes from one of Mboli's presentations that he was so kind to do on my channel some time ago. So the credit goes to Mboli for this particular slide. But regardless, this is just data from his book. And so remember earlier when I mentioned that there's very few words in the ancient Egyptian language and how Mboli's work reinforces that. Mboli argues for Negro Egyptian that the entire language was fundamentally built from 10 onomatopoeia words. And one of those words was the sound, which is ke, which is the sound of a stick breaking. From that fundamental root actually came the word ke to mean stick, branch, or a tree unto itself. And what we discover is that a lot of the Negro Egyptian words are built from a root meaning tree. And then from the tree, the ancient Negro Egyptian Africans saw themselves in relationship to the tree. And so the parts of the tree becomes the name for parts of the body, the human body, and even the human body itself. So when you say the word for tree and body is the word for human being and body. But also the word for branches becomes the word in the Negro Egyptian languages for how should I say, the limbs of the body. The limbs of the body are your arms, your hand, your legs, and your feet. And for, I guess you can consider for women the breast, and especially for men the phallus, the sexual organ. And so all of these words will have the same name as the word for branch of a tree. And so what we see here in front of us is his assessment of how a lot of these words come to be. So for example, the K plus the A vowel is a word for stick. And the word for stick becomes the word for object. And the word for object becomes the word for tool and thing. That same word for stick becomes the stresses on the feature of a stick being hard. So the concept of hard then becomes the concept of force. The concept of force becomes the concept of to hurt someone or something dangerous or stone, something hard. And so I hope y'all are getting what I'm saying. So if I'm confusing anyone, please say so in the chat. And, you can ask me a question. So somebody remind me if I'm not paying attention to the chat, if someone has a question or something like that, then I can address it, as we go. So, and I know there's going to be a time delay. So, I'll try to keep that in mind. So we'll look at, this part here, this word, the K plus the U or ku becomes the lower part of the tree. So ku right here. So these words, become the word for foot, and the foot becomes the word for a place, and a place comes to signify existence, to be. The same word for foot becomes the same word for ground and the earth, which is why in the ancient Egyptian language, when you see the word bu that is written with a foot, it also means, place or ground, land and earth. It reinforces what Mboli is saying here, the ancient Egyptian language, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. So that's what that represents. And then when you have this kiku together, it means the body of the tree itself. So it becomes trunk, body, person. And the emphasis on the bark becomes the skin. So you got to remember this. And I added this to Mboli's analysis. If we think about this from a biological evolutionary standpoint, remember that the modern apes and the Homo sapiens sapiens, we all have a common ancestor. And that ancestor, existed in the forest and existed in trees. And so the consciousness of these primates, their livelihood is literally in the tree. That's their focus. And so even through our psychological evolutionary development, we're going to relate to the closest thing that is in our environment. And so that was the tree. And so the tree, as time moves on, we notice that a tree stands up vertically. But there's no other animal like the Homo sapiens sapien that walks vertically. So we see the tree as kind of representative of us, except we're not moving, we're moving and the tree is not. But, even like in my latest book, Nesu Biti, A Lesson in Paronymy and Leadership, I show even in some modern countries, among modern ethnic groups, that they still to this day associate trees with human beings. That reinforces this concept that Mboli has presented us. So I want to give y'all that framework because it's within this framework that we understand exactly how Maat comes to be. So I'm going to move on. So in what you're seeing here And in Mboli's text, he creates a semantic map that shows us the evolution of these semantic features for these core fundamental words, especially the one that simply means tree or branch. So what you're seeing here is my kind of outline of this fundamental, series or evolution. So we come from the concept of tree that I mentioned earlier to branch. And from branch, we have 4 categories under branch. So stick, object, member, as in limb, hardness, and then fire and flame. So these are kind of characteristics and ideas that these early Negro Egyptian speakers, thought of when they thought of a branch. So of course the stick, and then of course it's an object, a thing. But it reminds us, when you look at a tree, it looks like it got arms, and that, and feet, and stuff to this nature. But we also notice that a tree is very hard. It's not soft, but also, of course, man discovered fire. And so what was essential to the development of the attainment of fire was tree branches. And so all of these things are associated. And so each one of these categories also has other subcategories. But for us, we're just going to focus on tree branch, tree branch, number 2, member, limbs, and then arm, hand, foot, leg, tail, horn, phallus, and its subsequent, categorizations. So I hope that is clear for those of you who are listening. So I argue that the word Maat in full ultimately comes back from the Negro Egyptian word for tree and branch, and that the word Maat is separate words, and it helps to explain these various meanings of Maat. So we have the evolution for this one, for the semantic map for arm and hand. For those that don't know, the word Ma'at also, or Ma'at, means to present or to offer someone something. And so that is an action of the arm. You actually extend your arm to present something to someone. So we have the tree, branch, member is a limb, arm, hand, and then the action of the arm, hand, which means to extend, offer, present. So I'm hoping y'all get this. So for the concept of Ma'at, to offer, we see here a painted stele or wall rendition of this pharaoh here. I forgot who it is, offering Ma'at to a deity or something like that.
Seti.
What'd you say? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, but I don't want to say it and it not really be him. So
wearing Ptah and the Shinu.
You can see, because I don't know what I can see men here, but like I can't really make out this.
Bernie Ptah is Seti with the teeth, the two,
yeah,
and then
the two eyes. Okay. So, I was just looking for a picture real quick of somebody presenting Maat. So I felt it was authentic, and this is common. So, and Seti usually wears this crown. But again, it could be somebody else, and I like to verify, and I couldn't verify immediately. But I appreciate that. Thank you, Brother Wujawu. So I hope that is clear. So, so now there's another word, Ma'at or Ma, which means pedestal or base. So this is a picture of the pedestal. This is usually what you see a statue sitting on. And this actually serves as a hieroglyph for the word Maat itself. And so we see this. It has a whole bunch of Egyptian writing. I can't really make it out, right now, but that's not our focus. We can tell whoever this person is, they're giving adorations and praise. But that's a different discussion. But this is the actual physical artifact of Ma'at, meaning base. but it comes from a separate evolution for the word for tree branch. So it's tree branch, member, limb, foot, leg, ground, base. So remember what we said earlier, that the word for foot is the word for ground, to exist, to be in space, and all of that good stuff. And so I hope y'all can see that the evolution of these two terms, you know, for Maat. And there's various different words for Maat. And in the text, I give you a full list and their evolution the same way that I did right here on this right-hand side. So moving on. Another thing that I discovered, again, based on Bantu, you know, allowed for me to verify that, you know, Maat has different variations, that is spelled a little differently, and that doesn't have prefixes and certain suffixes to it. So here's a representation. I wanted to demonstrate that this, we transliterate this as A, for those of you in the Metanetra group, the lowercase a, and then the lowercase x. But this, again, for Mboli is H, but for me is a K sound. And this here is kind of a K sound, almost a guttural K with, you know, with a bit of aspiration, you know, behind it. So that's what that little loop under the H means. So again, I don't know the size of your screens, but I hope that this visual comes clearer to you all. I recommend that y'all expand it to a full screen. So we can see that Maat has a slightly dialectical variation over here without the prefix and suffix. And we see that there's a correspondence between this grapheme here and this K grapheme here. So for those who are familiar with hieroglyphs, we often say ak, you know, or aku or something like that, but it's like rek, you know, an RK value for what's over here on this right-hand side. So remember, this is MRK, and this is just RK, you know, a different type of K type sound. So we have over here products, offerings, tribute, gifts. The same root here. And of course, the Deslize of Vouloir trio, you know, matches and corresponds with that. But pay attention to the consonant clusters here. So property, goods, possessions, things, supplies, sacrificial bread, offering bread. These are all within the same semantic field. Ma, place, or merik, place, location. And remember what I said, that, you know, the word for foot becomes the word for place. So for on this side here, if you can see my mouse, it's tree branch, member, foot, place. And it's the same over here. So a space, a storeroom, which is a place, a location. And ma or merik also means waters, or water in the sky, and just water in general. And so we have here, there's a prefix, a W here, and this is a prefix, but the same fundamental root, a body of water in the netherworld. So we can see that it's the same words, but a slightly different application. And then we have meriki or merik, and I'm just making up vowels. So don't assume this is a constant. I mean, as I'm pronouncing this as the ancient Egyptians are pronouncing it. But just merik, kill, slaughter, sacrifice. And then we have, you know, aket, a knife. And then there's some other examples that I give that shows, let me explain this, because this word right here without the T suffix, they have it in the Waterbush, the Grappa, and the Erman Grappa Waterbush dictionary is simply a verb. It doesn't define it. However, it has a determinative of a knife. And then you have this T suffix in this other variation here, and then it's defined as a knife. And one of the things that we discover is that the T suffix in many respects turns a verb into a noun. So we know that the verb has to deal with cutting or stabbing. And the T suffix nominalized it. We call it nominalization. Nominalized the verb and turned it to a noun. So it's still relatable to this concept of kill, slaughter, sacrifice, which fundamentally comes back to a root meaning to cut, slice and stab or stick, something to that nature. So this is going to be very important. So I want to show that Maat has these various different variations with prefixes and suffixes all throughout the language. And so this is going to be new to a lot of people. So this next slide here is very important here because I want to show that ancient Egyptian is monosyllabic, and that just like the Bantu languages, they just add, they concatenate these different morphemes to create larger concepts of the word, right? So what I argue, I don't know if it's the bolded characters are going to show up really well on your screen, but I have them bolded. We can see, I'm trying to show you a progression, but at the same time show you the correspondences between the more fuller pronunciation on the right side. That, you know, we have the different variations of so-called Ma or Merik, and then these variations over here with the same fundamental root. So what I argue is that there's a root for the word ma or ma, and that is this, that nasalized uvular trill R sound. And in Bantu, we would say ila. Excuse me, well, in Chiluba Bantu, we would say ila or le, and some other Bantu languages. And so Chiluba was ila. But here this means, this root here by itself means to tread. And y'all know what to tread means. It means to, you know, walk, stomp, you know, or stomp hard while walking, to tread, you know. And then with the T suffix here, that same root goes to mean to enter, you know, a place. In the Bassa language, they just say lo, come, arrive. But you see over here on the right, the same fundamental root in these different suffixes and the prefix goes to go, to journey, to go straight to a place. Same correspondence here. So let's go down further. The I suffix, I prefix or J prefix for the German transcription shows place, mound. And then over here, ma, place, location. Root here with a W and a I or J suffix, to extend or to be extended. Then you have ma over here, extend limbs. And then you have the same thing here without the I suffix, to present offerings. And then you have Maat over here, present offer, make presentation to. Then we have, you know, this here with the nasalized uvular trill root with the W and T suffix, slaughter, long knife. Then you have over here to slaughter, then to kill, to slay. And but remember that the different variation is riri for truly and things of that nature. So I put the Chiluba Bantu cognate here to show, you know, that it's still within this concept, that this root right here is what gives us, you know, the fundamental root in Egyptian. So we say, you know, uloloke. And I'm pronouncing this all the way wrong. So anybody Chiluba speaker, you know, who is you know, watching this, you know, please forgive me for murdering, you know, this term. But it's like uloloke, you know, right, righteous, straight, upright, upstanding, law, duty. Then you have the cognate here in Egyptian, real, true, right, just, fair, correct, proper. So for those who are viewing, I'm hoping that you can see the internal evidence that Ma'at has a fundamental root, which we can find in the language, which the Bantu reinforces and proves here. So I'm validating Bilolo with his argument that Ma'at is cognate with Malelela, but I add to him Bilolo's argument that there's a K suffix, which you see right here, and it corresponds to what you see right here, you know, and that M is a prefix, of course. So with that said, that same word right here, to tread, to enter, there's a series. I'm actually going to skip this one and then come back. So I want to start here. See, because I want to show you this evolution of Ma'at as it regards the word for truth. And so, okay, there we go. Now, in Mboli's text, this was what gave me a lead to go along this point. Now, remember what I said. Excuse me. Mboli, he has a totally separate argument for the origin of the word Maat. Now, he argues, as far as truth is concerned, that it comes from a word meaning speech. And I disagree with him on that point based on the evidence in which I've shown you thus far, and which I'll show in the future in the full article, as well as what is, available in this actual presentation here. So we have here this phrase in Sango. So this is actually in his book. I forgot to put the page number, but I can find it, where he says that the word for correctly and rightly in the Sango language, which is one of his native language, is na lege ni, correctly, rightly, which literally means by the way, lega meaning road or path. But this word for road or path is cognate with these words in these other African languages for foot or leg. And so he gives the example of Somali, lug, leg or foot. I add Kikongo, ling, walk, leing, leap, from Proto-Bantu, dinge, foot, leg, and that's a source museum or whatnot. And so we reconstruct from that kiku that we saw earlier with this, I want to believe this is an agent prefix, hikiku or hikiku becomes the nasalized volar trill, riku, which becomes these variations here. And I argue that even our English word leg comes from this Negro-Egyptian word. And so Indo-European has a lot of African words in it natively because Indo-European derives from African languages. That's another discussion. But we can see here that, and I verified that this in fact is cognate with all of these other variations which we saw earlier, especially in the Kikongo and other Bantu languages. And so I argue that the word for truth is in the same way that we see here in Sango, na legani, correctly, rightly, and that it comes from a tree branch, the tree branch member foot, and then foot to road path, and then from road path to the concept of truth. Because what is truth means to go the correct path, to go the correct road to one's destination. And this is what we find in other African languages, which reinforces, this stuff that we're talking about here. So this is how we get this concept of truth with Maat, is to go the correct path. And it's also reinforced by its exact opposite. So when you're looking at words for wrong and evil in ancient Egyptian, these are all words for to go the wrong path, to overstep the path, or to go astray. So all of this is these concepts are connected. So I'm hoping that these visuals make sense. So we have to verify now that our MRK or Maat root, is also associated with a road or a path. So that's why I go back. So these slides actually should have been switched. So remember I said what our root is. Our root is that word for foot, tread, to tread, to walk. And so that concept of to tread, to walk, the T nominalizes. Remember that word that I gave you, nominalization? It nominalizes, the verb, and we get the concept of road, way, path, and side. On the right-hand side are my sources. This stands for the Waterbush dictionary that I mentioned earlier. These are other dictionaries and text, which you can find on the online version for all of this. This is E. Wallace Budge, famous, Volume 1 and Volume 2 dictionary, and more Waterbush, and the Ptolemaic lexicon, that's also in German. But we can see that these common words for way, path, road all have this same root. Nasalized volar trill, nasalized volar trill, nasalized volar trill. But the nasalized volar trill also interchanges with I or the J sound. So this is the same word, way, path, road, here. So we can see an evolution here. And so you're seeing that it's just stacking on more monosyllabic morphemes. So just like Bantu, it just concatenates morphemes to bring about a certain point. So at some point, something may have been fossilized and they just add more on, onto it. But we see the same thing. And this actually may be the word Maat backwards. So M, R, and remember in Mboli, there was an H. So this is the dialectical variant, just the syllables inverse for path, road. But here we go to the bottom here. So MRK.W, passage, course, corridor, line, all dealing with a path. And notice the suffix, the determinative or the classifier, which we talk about. And it's a pair of feet, because if the feet, is what gives us our roads. So remember, before we started building concrete roads were made by animals and humans walking a path. And so that's the way for roads. So it became the way for the word for road, is just simply a word for foot or to run, to walk. And that's exactly what you see in this variation of Ma. So we are reaffirmed that Ma'at, truth, derives from the word for foot, path, in this text, in this context. So to show the evolution, of this word for truth, righteousness, justice, I put together this little sequence here that you can see. So remember, from Ke'u, foot, it evolved to that nasalized volar trill, which I argue originally is a word for foot. And remember, it's also a word for arm. The word for arm and foot are the same in classic Negro Egyptian. And even in some modern Bantu languages, the word for arm, foot is the same as leg, hand. So for those who are familiar with the ancient Egyptian language, it explains why this sound is fundamentally represented by a bird, because it has to deal with the wings. The association with early words for birds is for flight and movement, which is a result of the wings. But that's a different discussion. But from here, foot to tread, remember, to enter, and then this word here, mr.t, way, path, and then another. So this helps improve that this is a suffix, an active suffix in the language. So, singular, double, triple, 4 consonants here, 3 consonants here, 4 consonants here. So it's an evolution, and we're just stacking on morphemes. So from foot to tread, to enter, way, path, passage, course, corridor, line, true, correct, truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity, etc. All of that is involved, in the evolution of Maat. So I'm gonna stop here for any questions, either from the panel or from the people in the chat. And so if y'all have any questions, just let me know.
Hey, Otep, I have a 2 questions.
Go ahead.
Just for clarity as well. When you say concatenation, when you're adding on the morphemes, what is the difference, or if there's any difference, to the concept of agglutination?
Same thing.
Okay.
2 different words, same thing. So
okay.
Agglutinate just means to glue. Basically, that's the fundamental word, glue, or to stick on, add on something, to a fundamental root. And to concatenate is the same thing. We're just adding. So it's concatenation, agglutination versus ablat or abluat or ablut. And that's what you fundamentally find in Semitic languages. So to change the words fundamentally, they change the vowels in the sequence. We do it to an extent in English. For example, you have freeze and then froze.
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, English is inflectional. And so we're seeing here that in Middle Egyptian is not necessarily inflectional or ablat, it is concatenation, which the words are derived.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that makes sense. And thank you for that excellent question.
And then I have another question.
Go ahead.
Earlier you earlier you mentioned how a consonant may become fossilized. And I know just listening, I know what you mean, but I think that it'd be good to kind of explain that, because we kind of say it a lot. And
okay,
what would that mean?
Fossilization, you know what a fossil is. A fossil is something that is stuck in the ground, that has been there for a long time. It is no longer active. It's no longer alive. All we have is the remnant, the evidence, for example, that the dinosaurs live. But the dinosaurs, as we think of a dinosaur, I think an alligator is still a dinosaur. But that's another, and birds are dinosaurs technically. But for the most part, when we think of dinosaurs, we can only think about them as because of their fossils, the evidence, the remains that are left intact in the ground. We use that concept metaphorically in linguistics to discuss morphemes. A morpheme is a grammatical feature that has that is active, that gives a certain word a particular context. So, like for instance, we can fix something, and then there's also a prefix. The pre is a grammatical morpheme, but it's active in our language. So when we say pre to anything, then we know that whatever word we attach pre to, that it means something before whatever we're doing. So you can pre-register, or you get pre-approved, for all of those who get those silly mails, that you're pre-approved for a card, in the mail. That there's an approval process, but before you go through that, you're basically qualified, just on GP. So it's before the actual qualification, you really kind of qualify. So pre is an active prefix. However, in the word capital, the T in capital is a fossilized morpheme. It is not active. In English, we don't have an affix that tells us that the word that we're referring to refers to a body part. So the word in capital, all being a suffix, we say kaput, or sometimes we say in short just cap, but cap is the real root, and it's a root that means head. But the T in capital or kaput is a suffix that is fossilized. It is no longer active in the language, but based on some other studies in comparative historical linguistics, especially with African languages, we understand that T represented a suffix. And so because it's no longer active, we say that it's fossilized. So it's the same thing in the Egyptian language, that there's a few morphemes in certain words that are fossilized, that are not active in the language, but its presence is known because when we compare other languages, they have the same feature that may be active, but in Egyptian is no longer active. So I hope that gives a satisfactory answer to your question.
Yep, excellent. And that was pretty much.
Is there anything in the chat? My battery is going to run out on this phone.
Okay, yeah, I was scrolling up.
Nothing there.
Everybody seems to be commenting, sort of in agreement, not really a question.
Okay, cool beans. I want to make sure that at least everybody watching live, that we leave no one behind.
Oh, just one. I don't know if this is a question, but it may be a interesting point. There's someone in there that is I guess obviously familiar with Bantu languages, and they gave an example of the word race, RACE, if it's being cognate with Maat, because it deals with lineage or a race, something that's moving in a straight, moving fast, et cetera, et cetera.
I've never looked at it, but I think where there's smoke, there's fire. Mm-hmm. We may, that's something we can look into. I can't say definitively. I haven't looked into that word, but I can see it just even when we're talking about race, it's just a word for it. It could possibly just be a word for foot, footpath and run walk, and then have that RK that was palatalized into where you get C, because race is followed by an E. And so we know that an E or an I sound behind a K or a G often palatalizes it to T or re or, she sometimes, and then those can go into C, the sound C. So that's a possibility. And so, I'll follow up with that. And whoever asks that, just remind me and I'll get back to you on that. But I'm just going to move along, saying now. So I hope that made sense, in terms of the origin and evolution of Maat. And, so we'll move forward. So now we're going to get into the cognate of Maat among the Bassa people. So a number of years ago, he's still alive, but there was an article written by this man here. He's an Egyptologist, a linguist, and anthropologist from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon. And he wrote an article titled, hold on. The title of the article is right here at the bottom. It's in French, so I'll just translate it into English. Egyptian Maat and Bassa Mbak. Notes for the comparative study of the fundamental constitution of two African civilizations. And in this text, he noted that Mbak, the concept of Mbak, which is also pronounced Mbag with a G, the G and the K in this instance are allophones. And allophones means that, you can switch that two consonants or sounds switch with no change in meaning. And so in this instance, K and G are allophones for the word Mbak and its shared homonyms. So that the concept of Mbak, which we'll get into, corresponds really, really closely to this concept that we know as Maat. And so Maat has a cosmological orientation to it and application, as well as the ethical aspect to it. And so in this paper, he's mainly dealing with this comparison of these two concepts on a cosmological and social level, not necessarily with the ethics. And there's another article by Michael Eon, Maat or Egyptian Maat and Bassa Mbak. Oh, matter of fact, no, that's a mistake. That's not his article. I forgot the actual. No, it is his article. It just sounds similar to the to Pierre Almendigi. So it's Egyptian Maat and Bassa Mbak. Basically, a comparison of two regulatory principles of the cosmos. So this is the second one who is comparing Maat to the cosmological aspects, or Mbak to the cosmological aspects of Maat. So two different authors, but Pierre Omendigi is the first, and he's building off of Nomendigi's work. So my phone ran out of juice, so I can't view the chat anymore. That's okay. And all right, hold on one second while I plug that in. It doesn't affect what we doing. But you know, got to put it on the charger and all that good stuff. Okay, so here we go. So what we learn is that Mbak has a fundamental root, Bak, and it can mean gathering or leveling or sift or even to develop or establish. Mbak, M being a prefix, can mean universe, time, stand, container, the laws of nature. It actually has a lot more meanings, and we'll get to them in a bit, and they'll be fully explained in the article. I'm gonna go back to this slide that actually should have been, you know, further down, but as usual, when we're doing these kind of comparisons, we have to do our due diligence, and we have to establish sound laws and sound meaning correspondences. And so these are just a few examples. There's actually some more of the correspondences in ancient Egyptian with the basa. So we're going to notice that even though we said that this is an R sound in Egyptian, but it corresponds with a B, the bilabial plosive B in basa. And so again, we look to the consonants. We don't know what the vowels are in Chikam or Egyptian, but we know what the consonants are. So this reinforces that these are consonants in terms of the correspondences. So we have this word, you know, rope, and then, you know, we understand Maat as a unifying principle that holds up all of creation. Then you have this root here, put together or to tie. And so we have rope, and then we have the verb as the noun, and then we have the verb version to put together, to tie. And so, you know, we have Bak, which is a gathering or a unity, which in Bantu languages is also symbolized by tying together, like you're tying a bushel, you know, so you're tying something together that becomes a unit. And then we have a different variation, Mbing, which means whole or entire. And we're going to see that K, Ng, even though these are two, you know, consonants, these are actually articulated simultaneously in Basa language. So you treat this as one, like Nga. It's like a Nga, you know, whatever. And so, you know, where there's an M, there's either zero, meaning that there's no prefix, or there is a prefix, you know, to this fundamental root. So we have Maat as kind of balance and, you know, a leveling, so to speak. You have Bak, leveling. You have Ma, meaning wind, breeze, or to sail. So the noun and the verb. And I think the W nominalizes verbs as well, this W suffix. So you have Mbuk, wind. Again, M corresponds to M. The nasalized volar trill R corresponds to B. And this suffix here, which I argue is a K, and then Bowley argues is an H or an I, corresponds to K in this value. Remember, then we have so-called Ma'amerik, base, pedestal, Mbak, stand or container, and a stand is a base. You have Marakit, orderly management, order, harmony. You have Ibag, it has a different prefix. Ibag, remember what I said, that K and G are allophones in this language, and they interchange. And so even when we say Mbak, we can say Mbag. It just really just depends on the dialect. But I'm using two different dictionaries and sources for this. So some, you know, one may use one and the other may use another. But Ibad, structuring, arranging, ordering, grouping together harmoniously, order, structure. So we can see that this Ibad is related to this Bak here. Remember what I said, K and G are allophones. And so, you know, the changing of the letter in some instances may just change a particular application of the same word. So you have, you know, Marik, village, Mbak, kinship, family, village. Then you have another variation in Mbe, village. And so that K, I argue, is palatalized as well, you know, to Y. You know, Merku or Merikwe, the leader. Maraki, the chief. Imbo Imbag is the manager of social institutions, head of the lineage. And thus, in essence, they're the chiefs. But they don't have kings. The Bassa people don't have kings like we have kings and chiefs. They just have elders. And those elders who are initiated into Imbag, they're called Imbo Imbag. They're basically the priest. And so we actually, in ancient Egyptian, we have priests of Maat as well. And they do the same functions. They had the same role and same functions in ancient Egypt as they do amongst the Bassa. And I should say that the Bassa even have an oral tradition that they come from Egypt and that they stopped through Ethiopia before moving west to Cameroon. And so that's part of their oral tradition. Now, moving further, you know, we could just go down the list and you'll see that these correspondence. So these are the sound correspondences, you know, that I have discovered as a result of my comparative analysis. So on your own time, you can just stop and look at this yourself and just kind of go at it slowly on your own pace once this, you know, recording is done and it's up for everyone to view. Again, this was just a, you know, because I was at the conference, I just wanted to show them that I, you know, did a full analysis, and I just wanted to give them a snippet. And so you can kind of see it better, you know, this way, the sound, you know, meaning correspondences, you know, between these phonemes. I'm not even sure if I really have time to get into this, but because this is part of a larger analysis that's going in the book, that's not going into the article. So you have to wait on the book for this one. But I show that Maat and the Nu are actually the same word. We call the Nu, but it's really two consonants. It's, you know, no way, newe, inawe, you know, whatever. But it's two, it's fundamentally two consonants. And we can demonstrate this by comparing with other African languages. So I'll just take, you know, the first three, you know, for our purposes here. So we have so-called newt, oval, and then we have in Kikongo, Mboka. It's going to be switched. The syllables are going to be switched. So for those of y'all who are familiar with Mboli's work and my work, and, you know we go off of Kikwe and Kweki languages and how the syllables switch. Well, this is evidence of that. And so, so the M, of course, is a prefix in all of this. And so it's present in Kikongo, it's present in Bassa, but it's absent for these Middle Egyptian terms and these Yoruba terms. So this Newe or Nawit, oval, is cognate with Kikongo Mboka. The B corresponds with the W, and the K corresponds to the N, because historically it was really Ng. It was really, both of those sounds were together, but they split at, you know, a very long time ago. Again, I go into the details in the larger book, which I can demonstrate that this is an NG, you know, type sound, which corresponds here. So remember that the, you know, for Kikongo and Bassa, the correspondences switch. However, in Yoruba, they're in matching order. So for Yoruba, the N corresponds to the G, and then the W corresponds to the B. So we have Mboka, large spherical bead in terms of a circle. Then you have Agbo, a circle in Yoruba. We have so-called Nu or Neweya pot, And then we have in Kikongo Mbungwa, cup, mug. And then in Yoruba, we have Igba, calabash, Agbe, gourd. Now, remember for Brother Wujawu and possibly Sunjeti, I don't know if he was in that conversation, when we was deciding whether the K, the value of the K sound for the so-called basket, the monoliteral, this would be its cognate in the Yoruba language. Igba, calabash. So sister, I forgot the sister's name, who suggested, she showed us the video about the other brother arguing that the K monosyllabic monoliteral glyph is actually a calabash. And do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, that showed that was in the forgot the sister's name as well. Don't want to exclude her out of it, but
yeah, I mean, we'll give you your props later. We'll plug it in for your name. But anyway, that's the cognate. So if it was calabash, but you can see it could be a cup, mug, pot. It doesn't matter. It's something that can hold water, or a liquid. So that's the fundamental, unity of all three of these things here. And then we have, ni bowl or ostrich eggs. So in Kikongo we have Mbangu, basket, which would be a bowl, but in Yoruba we have Igba, garden egg. So one has one value, and then the other language has the other value that is both present in Middle Egyptian.
I just want to quickly say her name was Sister Deidre McIntyre.
Okay, well, thank you, Deidre McIntyre. I just wanted to provide you some potential evidence for your assertion, and we can see that if this was a K value, back in the day, then it would be pa, because in Egyptian ba also has a voiceless correspondence pa, a KP variant. So I got to check into that a little bit more. But we also have Nibit sky, Newt sky. So you can see the correspondence, the W and the B, right, for sky. And then we have Ngambwila, Wila being a suffix, heavens, Mbog, universe. Now let's go all the way down here. It just reaffirms again. Hold on. We have Geb, earth, Mbok, earth. And then we have in Yoruba, Igberiko, country, district, and Be, live, dwell. But all of that is words for earth or ground. But I don't have it on here, but there's actually a Geb, a word Geb, that means sky. And so it reinforces. So we already know this B corresponds with this W. And remember what I was saying is N corresponds to G in G and K in these other languages. And so there's even evidence in the ancient Egyptian language that is the case. And so we know that this was Ing, like we mentioned earlier, Ing or Ngu, as even you find in Mboli's work. And so, but that's another discussion. So I just want to show y'all, when they're talking about the cosmological. So remember, we've already established that Mbog is cognate with Maat. So you can just substitute from this point on, and all of these are different variations of the word Maat. So when we start talking about new, the sky, and remember they talk about Maat was present from the beginning, that's because Maat is the universe itself. It is the order, and it is the new. And so, now we have to put together a theory for why, these same words, are being used in these different contexts in the ancient Egyptian culture. So I'll just skip this. I just wanted to, throw that to you. So, again, in Kikongo, Mbungi would be cognate with the so-called nu or the nu. We say the nun, but it's actually, these two reduplicated. And this actually may be a suffix for place, for abstracts. And so, I put the dot in the middle so we understand that the fundamental root is this. So the NG right here and B for the W, but M is a prefix. Mbungi, Nu, Maat, in terms of the goddess Nu, or excuse me, the god Nu, or the Nun, Nwe, whatever, however you want to say it. It's all the same thing, you know, in terms of the fundamental words. They're fundamentally related. And so we see that, you know, all of this means cosmos, nation, society, you know, village. We can, you know, there's other different variations. I go into a different discussion here. I won't do it now, but it's fundamental to understanding these concepts of Maat and Imbog and Mbongi, because you have to deal with the cosmology of the people. The people deal with the cosmology first. And so this is just one. I have several examples, especially from Africans themselves, who are saying that if you want to understand who we are as a people, you have to study our cosmology. And so we have this one author here reinforcing that. I think he's a European, but the way he worded it, I wanted to cite him. He says, Africanizing history. And this is from a text, Writing African History, which is a book on methodology. So for those looking for another book on methodology and how to write African history, here's another book, Writing African History. You know, edited by, I forgot something that Phillips is his last name. But anyway, the introduction is by Daniel McCall. And he says in his introduction, Africanizing history must begin with a holistic attempt to understand the total worldview and cosmology of African peoples. For without looking at their oral history in the total context of their thought, we cannot understand the meaning that history has had for them and why they have preserved it. And so there was a larger discussion that I wanted to get into in terms of the ethics and how they relate to each other, and how the cosmology, you know, helps us to really get at the heart of these fundamental concepts of how the ancient Egyptian people related to each other. And so, you know, that's within that concept. And so if you understand the cosmology and you understand these concepts, here's another variation of the word Maat. And this is the graphical representation of Maat in the Congo and among the Bassa and among the Dogon and among the Yoruba. And they all use variations of the same word to describe it. And so this is what we call the Dekinga symbol. And this is supposed to represent the evolution and cycle of life. You know, starting from V1 here, Vangama, the Musoni stage, which is the conceptualization and development stage. V2 is Vaika, Kala stage, the stage of being born, to be, to exist. Then you grow and mature and you're in the Vanga stage, to Kula stage. And then, of course, you get old and then you die. And then the life cycle starts again because they believe in reincarnation. And so this is what you're looking at. It's a circle, but it's also a spiral. And this comes from the text. This is actually my rendition of what he has in the book. So I'm combining several cosmograms. But this word here, kinga, means to turn, to spin. And this is exactly cognate with the word ma'at, because this word here is used for words for pot and pottery, meaning to spin. For those of you who know how to work pottery, and how pottery comes, if some of y'all seen that movie Ghost and remember the white man behind the other woman, he gets and possesses Whoopi Goldberg, and you know his wife, who the dead ghost left as a result of him dying. They're sitting in the room while she's potting, and you spin the pot, and then you add clay and you wet it, and then you use your hands to help turn, in some instances, but to help shape and mold the pot. And so it is that concept where you get this concept of turn and spin, but it's turn and spin with your hand. So for this discussion, it is an evolution of tree, branch, member, limb, hand, arm,
so yeah,
and spin. So this is what you're seeing here, but this is the cosmos even for the Bakongo speakers. And this root here is cognate with Maat. And the reason why I say spin is cognate with Maat, which I demonstrate in the article, is because the word to arrange and to put in order, it has the same etymology, and it's the same word as this word, here. So it's this word, this ke, that was palatalized and became the nasalized volar trill in Egyptian. It gives you the R sound, but that's another discussion, which we won't go into. And here's other variations. So this is the Mbongi, the universe, the circle, but this is the evolution. This is the ordering of the universe. So just like in ancient Egypt, where the so-called Nun was the undifferentiated matter, that undifferentiated matter was then molded into clusters, which we call form and life. And so what we discover is that Ma'at is actually life. It is actually movement and motion. It is the organized movement of motion and spin that gives phenomena its shape and form. We can reaffirm this in Egyptian, and especially amongst its cousins and brothers and sisters in the Bakongo, going all the way to the Yoruba and the Dogon further west. And so I'm hoping I'm making sense, in this. But in ancient Egypt, Ma'at is more elaborate in terms of personification and articulation. But when you start going west and in the Central Africa, Ma'at is given as a spiral or a circle. And then it represents, saying the hand spinning and molding, and even the concept of weaving. So the goddess Neith, comes to mind, with this concept of weaving, because you have to weave in a circle and twist. All of that is the same root for order, to make, to arrange, to fix, to put into place. To remember, the word alluja that I remained from is to repair, but also to fix and to sew, so to speak. And in this instance, when we're talking about the kinga and the pots, it is, God is seen as somebody who is taking the clay and stacking it, like you would do bricks to shape and mold a house. And that's exactly what the Dogon say that Amma did as well. And you can see that Amma is also represented with the spiral and stuff like this, and the words are cognate, because they're all related languages. They use the same words, just with their own dialectical pronunciations to describe these phenomena. So with that said, and I'm skipping around because it's a short presentation, even though we've extended it, because I just did a little bit more explaining than I would in an actual live presentation. But the word Ma'at is also cognate with the word Ma'at. The word Ma'at is a variant of the word Mer, meaning to love in ancient Egyptian. It's just the word Mer with an added suffix, the K suffix. And, of course, we do the due diligence, we do the comparisons, and we find out what love is. And so love follows that same trajectory, because love is about feeding, to extend your hand and arm, to embrace, and show affection to someone, or to extend your arms to give somebody a gift, or to feed them with food. That's what love is. It's about feeding people, extending your arm to help, and to transfer the life energy, in the food to give to them, so they can be revitalized and happy. And so what I argue is that, African Americans need their own religion. And I decided to, help shape the religion and to give it a title. So I called it Bolingo, which is a word for love, which is cognate with Ma'at. And Ma'at also has to deal with friendship and family. And these are, some representations of it. So, you have Bolingo, love, and Shango, which in Boli tells us that is actually a borrowing from Lingala, which is Bulingo. And then you have Molinge, which is child, which is the result of love. Y'all getting together and doing the adult thing, results in the child and family. And so in Chiluba Bantu, we have Bulongo, friendship, family, relationship. Chilongo, relationships, circle of friends, knowledge, comrades, genre, linguistic, Chikongo, Chienkongo, friendship, camaraderie. These latter terms correspond with Middle Egyptian Reki. Because remember what I told you, that nasalized volar trill and the R sound, they correspond, they interchange. And that this K sound here, this aspirated K, corresponds to the K that we see in ancient, in the word Maat or Merik, whatnot, which means friend, acquaintance. The feminine T suffix, female friend, female acquaintance. And then this interchanges also with another H-type sound with a dot under it. Rehu, comrades, mates, friends. All of this is fundamentally what we're striving to be, in terms of our relationships. That when we come together as a people, that it is always in the spirit of friendship and love, because they go hand in hand. And so, this is what I named the religion, to remind us, of our obligations to each other. And so that now we can think of some protocols so that we have the structures and the social structures in place that we can live up to our religion. And so Ma'at is the religion of ancient Egypt. And so what I'm arguing is that we need to be in alignment with Ma'at, but I'm using a more up-to-date, African term for the word that's cognate with Ma'at, which is bolingo, which is love. And so I like this quote here from Dr. Cornel West. And, he's known for making this, saying this phrase that to never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. And that's very telling, because even though he's a Christian theologian, what this phrase that he just said is very Ma'atic, is very African, because justice and love are the exact same, especially in ancient Kemet, and in other African languages that come from the same root. Justice and love come from the same root. Even the word love is cognate with Ma'at. That's a different discussion. But this phrase here is the phrase that I want to be the central mantra of the new African American religion, that is centered on humanism and love, especially for our people, one another, and family. So the phrase again is never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. And so we're coming to the end here, and I wanted to stress this phrase here and why this is important, because African religions and African cultures are centered on the vitality and life principle. And taken from this article, I actually don't have the real title of the article here, but I will put it, it's in the actual article, the real article, from which this phrase, but in the article from Lynn 2010, it's correctly cited, but I don't have the article title here. I'm showing that life is at the center of African religion. And in this article, he says that he's quoting somebody now. So he's saying, we must start from the life concepts of African clan society. Life is so central that it must be characterized as sacred. Now he goes on, God is understood as possessing life in its fullness and as the source of life. Humans have the inalienable responsibility for protecting and prolonging the life of the community in all its aspects. Morality is quite simply the determination of whether an action promotes or diminishes life. The Tanzanian theologian Laurenti Magesa sounds a very similar note. For African religion, he's quoting him now, for African religion, all principles of morality and ethics are to be sought within the context of preserving human life in its power or force. The sole purpose of existence is to seek life, to see that human life continues and grows to its fullest capacity. This is important because, again, you have to wonder what is the science behind giving your ancestors offerings, because it's a life principle thing. You're exchanging life, you're adding life to life. And this extends to your other family members, even the ones who are not physically here. And so you show love in real life by feeding, your neighbor and your family, and then you show life, you show love to your ancestors by feeding them as well, the same way you would feed your living family. And it's interesting because when you see these depictions of Maat, you'll always see her with a life symbol, the Ankh, on her kneecap in a seated position. And there is a play on words here, because this is also a word for mine, which means feather or plum. But this is actually, we should think of this not as Maat, but as Shu, the god Shu, which is air. And as I demonstrated in my 2013 book, the Ankh has to do with breath. So you have two things here dealing with breath. And for those who are familiar with ancient Egyptian texts, you notice that the gods are always putting the Ankh against the nose of, the kings and queens, or just people in general, because the Ankh has to deal with breath. But I say that all to say this, for example, for the stela of Horemheb, which is in the 18th dynasty, it says, "Hail to you, Maat, lady of the north winds, who opens the nose of the living and who gives breath to those in his bark," Ra's bark. When you read Malana Karenga's book on Maat, especially in the chapter on Maatan anthropology, you will see several citations of Maat being associated with breath, that she is the breath to the nose of everyone who she encounters. But remember, there's a word Ma that means wind, breeze, in air, essentially. And this is exactly what this feather represents, because this is the symbol of the god Shu, which represents wind, breeze, and air. And so when they say that Ma'a, opens on the nose of the living and who gives the breath to those in his bark, because she represents the north winds. She represents wind, which is why you see her with bird feathers. Because in Negro Egyptian languages, the word for feathers is the same word for arms and air and breeze. So they're synthesizing all of these concepts. And it's this comparative study that allows us to finally get at the heart of the symbols of Ma'at. So when you see the Ma'at feather, it is a symbol of life, of breath. And it's reinforced with this other symbol, the Ankh, which also represents breath, which I discussed in the 2013 and provide the evidence for that. So now we have to reevaluate, what is exactly being, weighed in the papyrus of Ani, when you have to weigh your heart against the feather of Ma'at. We say that it should be light as a feather, but I guess my new interpretation is that they're weighing the deeds to see if your actions added life to life. Did it preserve life? If your actions were equal to the actions necessary to preserve life, then you move on, into the heavens or whatnot, the way you want it. So now I want to go back, actually to this one slide. Come on, slow mover. Let's do this. It's acting slow for some reason. Should be the next one. Yep. Here we go. So for the cognate of Maat in the Bassa Bantu language, we know is Bag or Mbag or whatnot, but we understand Ma'at as being the governing social principles or the do's and don'ts in ancient Egypt. So a cognate is lebag in Bassa, which means the tradition, the culture, the system of social attitudes. Another variation is mbag, what we talked about earlier, which is a cultural system. But mbag, and remember mbag or mbak are the same word. It's just, somebody down the street may say mbag, and then you go 2 houses down, they'll say mbak. They're the same exact word. Legui le mbag, which is a word for culture. All of these are just words for the culture of the people. But this word is significant right here. Ligwe means birth. And this whole phrase means birth of mbak, which is the culture. We translate that into English as that which gives birth to mbak is their culture. In other words, we can substitute mbak or mbag with ma'at. That which gives birth to ma'at is the culture. That which gives birth to life, that which gives birth to love, that which gives birth to reciprocity, harmony, and balance, that which gives birth to justice. Those actions is what the culture is for the Bassa Bantu people. And that's what it was for the ancient Egyptians. And this is a model which we should follow. And I'm just going to skip back down to see if I have any more slides. I don't think I do. And Cornell West, we saw you. Maat, we saw you. Boom. I'll skip that. That's just some extra stuff. Maat is a lived tradition. I forgot where this is. This looks like it's South Africa, but it could be Sudan. This folks here, but you notice the same feather, the same type of arm beads, and they replaced the circular beads here. There's a few beads, but with the the leopard skin, saying circle here. Same headband, head wrap. You see, that when we talk about Ma'at is a Pan-African consciousness, a Pan-African culture, a Pan-African religion. Ma'at is the religion of Africa. And with us trying to reestablish ourselves, in our right African minds, in our African centeredness, we should follow suit in adopting Ma'at as our religion. And I suggest the word bilingual as the word to encapsulate exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So I finished my presentation, and I hope that y'all enjoyed it. So I'm switch screens here, and that is that. And so now I open the floor to questions that anybody may have on the panel, and I can't see the chat, so y'all may have to inform me of any kind of questions or whatnot in the chat, speaking directly to my people on the panel.
Okay, well, I'll just start off by saying, yeah, that's a lot of information to take in, and I'm already, pretty familiar with your work, and even the work of Jean-Claude Mboli, and that's a lot to take in. So I just imagine if this was ever a 20-minute presentation, I can imagine what an hour presentation would entail. But so yeah, I'll just recommend that this will have to be watched quite a few times, bookmark it and watch it a few times to follow along with it. So I just want to say thanks for sharing that, and to see the process to see that this type of work is being done, because not only are you basically connecting the dots of work that's done by the rigor of others, but you're also applying rigor and making discoveries, and you're adding to the body of knowledge, and that could clearly be seen. So you're asking challenging questions, and then going forth seeking the answers to those questions, and then you're disclosing the methods of doing so. So to me, that's what scholarship is all about. So I want to thank you for representing what scholarship is about, from what I can see. So that's just my so I really don't have a question. Wanted to make that comment.
I appreciate it. Again, I appreciate it. I know I didn't explain everything just perfect. If I did, that'd be a first. So, but yeah, I mean, and there's more. So that's just a snippet of what actually is entailed in this analysis, which is why I have to write a book, on it. That even the article which I'm doing will not suffice. And so, I'm building off of, again, as you said, that, certain people have given me keys. And, based on my studies and background, I was able to add and reaffirm, in many instances, certain arguments. But as I mentioned earlier, go against a particular argument. So, I await, Mboli's response, to this, when I share the full article with him when it's done. And he'll maybe, see this. And so hopefully I gave enough that, he can assess it. But, of course, my fuller arguments is in the article itself. So anyone else on the panel?
While they're getting their thoughts. Also, this work right here specifically about Maat, just how you saw in Boli's work, and it kind of confirms some independent things that you have discovered and looked at. This work right here, your work, has confirmed for me some of the things that I independently had notions of, but may not have spent as much time to look into, and for whatever reason. So this is like inspiring as well. For example, the idea of Ma'at, everyone pretty much concludes Ma'at means truth. You have a couple of other words: truth, reciprocity, harmony, and even balance. But we discussed that too. But basically truth. But through the linguistic work, you've shown that not only does it mean truth, as far as the final destination of reaching truth, but it's also incorporating the journey of getting there, the path itself. And then so I see that elsewhere in kind of what you spoke about last, the cosmology or cosmogony of the people, especially with ancient Kemet, how everything is connectedness. So it's this thread, or this I don't know what you want to call it, this chain that's connecting everything, that's established the law, which are the relationship of everything, which I see as being defined or personified as, or under the umbrella of Ma'at. This interconnectedness, interrelationship, that's binding everything, to everything that was there at the very beginning. It had to be for things to come about. So, the linguistic is like kind of crystallizing these ideas or these things that I'm seeing in the text. I'm reading the stories and probing the actual language, getting deeper understandings and deeper meaning. So yeah, I just wanted to say that as well.
Thank you. Yes, and another aspect of this, in terms of Ma'at path, is epistemology, because epistemology is concerned with how do you know the truth. And what steps did you take? What methods did you take to know the truth? And so, epistemology is concerned with the quality of your journey to a conclusion. And that's what Ma'at is, as it regards truth. But also, you know, something to consider as it regards Maat is the this concept of path and walking a path and the word for road. But the question is, who is the people who paved the road? You know, the ancestors and the elders, the people who came before us. So they have, in other words, the elders have given us a direction. And if we follow suit, then, you know, we will get to the destination in which we seek. If we follow their guidance, if we follow their lead. Remember, Ma means lead too.
Mhm.
So we're seeing how all of these terms, you know, interconnect. And even with that, remember the term Hesi, you know, which is wretched, vile, you know, or whatnot. And the analysis given by Dr. Mario Beatty, when he says that the earliest renditions of Hesi were not used against foreigners. They were used against Egyptians themselves and applied to people who did not follow the instructions, you know, of the leader.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Hesi fundamentally means to go off path, whereas the Ma'atic thing to do is to be on path, to take the correct path. So if you are if you're on the right path and you go the correct path, then you are doing Ma'at. But if you don't follow, you know, our alleged wise instructions, then you are committing Hesi, or you are Hesi. And that S root is the same root that you find in Isfet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that analysis. And so, you know, we're starting to see exactly, you know, these fundamental ideas as they shape and make sense in ancient Egyptian language and culture.
All right.
But again, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying if anybody else on the panel had something. I was just combing through the comments to see if there was any questions, just to see how everyone else. I told them I'll ask on their behalf. So a comment was made. A comment was made first. Someone is saying that the feathers of a bird are used to guide a bird on its journey. I guess they're kind of coincide that with what you were saying.
That could be assessed as well. I know in terms of guiding, usually it's the tail, but it would all be like, because Negro Egyptian is there's not many words in the language. They're just all the words for body parts are used to expand to mean other more abstract concepts. Mm-hmm. So it could all be related. Well, I know in terms of lead and guide is related to foot walk, and you know, as I was saying, in terms of the making the trail.
Somebody said, "Is the word Kessie related to the word off the heezy?" No, they were just joking. But I was one other person is asking, when will the article be available?
I don't know. As I mentioned earlier, well, I don't know if it was in this session because you know we had that other little fiasco, but the article I'm submitting to be published. See, the Sheikh Anta Diop conference this year is actually going to publish some of the proceedings, and so I'm submitting the article in hopes that it will be published in the Sheikh Anta Diop, you know, journal or whatever is being published. So if it is published, you know, that way, if it is accepted, then I can't tell you when it will be released. But if not, then, you know, I will release it. But I'm not finished with the article yet, so I still couldn't tell you an exact date. So this is one of the reasons why I did this lecture, because I don't know how long that process will be. but I wanted y'all to at least be informed of what's, you know, coming in the pipeline and exactly what I presented. Because normally I'll present and then I'll upload the recording, you know, online. But they didn't have a recorder, and I didn't record my session at all. So this is kind of to make up for that. And so y'all get the expanded. So even the people at the conference didn't get all of this, you know, this expanded, you know, conversation. So, and I'm seeing your question, you know, so would the M be a prefix in all Negro Egyptian words? Not necessarily, you know.
Maat, I'm just quoting them. Maat.
Okay. So that's his question. Yeah. Okay. So Jehuti Maat. So no, the M wouldn't be a prefix in all Negro Egyptian words, just in some, and just in this case. So we can tell that it's a prefix because some renderings of the words, the cognate words, have it and some don't. And so, and it's, see, the thing is with comparative linguistics, you have to know intimately the languages in which you're comparing. So you'll just know that there's certain features of certain languages. So if I see mu or ba or bu in Chiluba Bantu, I automatically know that that's a prefix because I know the language. But I know for a fact that those prefixes are absent in Yoruba language. So if I see the Yoruba word and it doesn't have that morpheme in front of it, but it's present in Bantu, then more than likely this is an affix, which Bantu would reaffirm that because Yoruba no longer has those grammatical features, I would expect it to not be present. Or if it is present, it's fossilized. That means it's not active. And so that's exactly what we see in these related languages. So no, M would not be a prefix in all Negro Egyptian words. It just depends on the word and what it, and if it's a prefix in that language. So I hope I answered that question.
Yep, he said dua. I guess everybody, people are digesting what you're saying. I'm looking at the comments, and most of the comments was pretty much chiming in, agreeing, adding on to what you were saying.
All right.
Not really. I don't see any actual questions. So yeah, it's gonna take some time.
All right. And so again, I open it to the rest of the panel. If y'all don't have anything, and nobody else has anything in the chat, then you know I'll close the session out. So
Up there's Uncle Keck.
What's good, fam?
What's happening?
How y'all
We had some
doing,
technical difficulties earlier, so we had to start late.
Oh man, that's all good, man. I'm in Baltimore and I had my son, so that was, you know,
Yeah.
always good to spend time with them, man. They laughing, having fun looking at the squad. They 16. It's time for to hit them up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so it's a slow process. You never want to overdo it with your kids like that. You know what I mean? They run away from it. So, I'm taking my time with them, just hit them with the simple. And so I'm just glad to have a platform where I can introduce the children into it. I think what I really like to say is I really appreciate your work and the way it has grown over time. Would you consider yourself an expert in linguistics, Brother Saw?
Would I consider myself
An expert? Qualification.
I guess so. I know more than a little bit, but I don't know all which I could.
Okay, but for sure, we can go ahead and put you at the top of the small community that we share in. We can definitely put you at the top of that. And I think our conversations, me, Ujao, and the rest of the squad, and the serious conversation we had over people not being able to take critique. Now, I know I take a lot of shit, right? I talk a lot of shit. I just do. Excuse my language. But at the end of the day, no one can actually say that I'm not willing to shut the hell up and learn and realize when I'm wrong. And that's called growth. I'm just wishing that other people around us could do that and stop blaming the finger. Because you said something that's very, very important. This was on the phone. And I know you don't mind me sharing it, right? you said you can't bang on the scholarship. I mean, you can't shoot up the scholarship. That's not how you win, right? You study and vigor, right? And proving your point is how you do it. And thank goodness for brothers like you, Joe, Smash, Dr. Mayat. I mean, just, the whole team, the Masi Warriors, Nahisi, everybody, for just, what I'm saying, at least trying to at least push that envelope. You feel me? Even looking at Jean-Claude Mboli, right, being on Brother Neb's show, right, shows a lot of growth on Neb's part in recognizing the mistakes he was making on certain information. I mean, just to study. If people could just take critique for a minute, right? The community would grow in leaps and bounds, and we could actually do something. Yeah. This thing that we have of banging on each other and be at the pinnacle of ready to fight, it's a bunch of bullshit. Now, you, Nujao, and y'all been saying this for years. I've been watching y'all work for years, man. And when certain people try to act like they brought certain things in, methodology don't belong to nobody. It belongs to people that want to be serious about their work. And everybody just don't have it. And I mean, and I'm glad to have fat being trimmed off the goddamn bone, right? For those who don't want to have it. We really don't have dislike for people personally. I think we just have dislike for those who don't want to put the study in and be man enough to admit when you're wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, I talk trash, Joe, you all the time. It's taped and recorded. And then I'll come back and say, man, they proved their point. I was just wrong. And I'll be serious while I be arguing and get the good jokes in, right? You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, man, look, when you wrong, man. And so I think we can all learn from each other. And I like the fact that you do what you do and be in places where other people can't even get there, but yet still come back home to the people and teach. I appreciate that about you, sir. You feel me? For making sure that we keep the level. Same with Ujao, I appreciate that, right? I appreciate the whole team and what we doing. So, we're going to keep fighting the fight, and people going to keep hating, man. So I'll just be the punching bag for the hate. I don't mind. You know what I mean? I'm good with that. You know what I'm saying? I'm good with that. As long as I know that the people are learning something, man, and, like the work you have, I read your work all the time, man, like they not even getting it. It'd be groundbreaking on so many different levels, man. It helps me understand what it means to be African and what the Africans was talking about. I call it, it demystifies the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? And I think this is crucial. You know what I'm saying? We know we're going to have this debate on the 28th, right? And it's all based off of, not the 28th, when it's December 18th.
18.
Yeah, and it's all based off of mysticism. Europeans mystifying things before they deciphered it. And this is what people are following. Yeah. You can't do meta-nets, you can't do. So I got a good question for you about the meta-nets real fast. Right? And we watched Brother Aswar Kwesi speak, and he talks about it being deciphered, right? But then he comes right back and says that he doesn't believe, right? He didn't say for sure, but he says he doesn't believe that Champagne Leon and them got the esoteric meaning of it. And so I want you to answer that, right?
All right.
Okay. And I thought, maybe I'm wrong, I thought that after they deciphered, one thing they recognized, right, was that the Egyptians were great administrators, dealt with infrastructure. You know what I'm saying? Like, people wrote letters. Like, we had the same thing we do today, right? It's basically what the brothers and sisters was doing. Everything they wrote ain't had nothing to do, didn't have something to do with religion, like we seem to think. You feel me? So then, what exactly could Brother Aswar Kwesi be talking about? Is he right? Is he wrong? Because we know that's what they want to use in a debate. So let's diffuse that whole thing right now. Help me out with that.
It depends. Again, everything that I've noticed in the ancient Egyptian language is that they were doing everything humanly possible to let you know exactly what they're talking about. The barrier is that the people just don't know the language. The language tells you everything. And so there's also, you have to know these cultural nuances, like paronymy, which I've been stressing for the past, couple of years. That if you don't understand paronymy, you won't understand the synthesis that is going on in ancient Egypt or in other African cultures. And so when you understand these things, you can systematically get to the heart of a lot of these things. There's esoteric, but esoteric simply means that there's a small body of people, who know something. But that doesn't necessarily mean that esoteric is secret. That's what people mistake. Like if I am in a higher mathematics, course or whatnot, or if I'm a PhD in mathematics and I know certain, calculus formulas or whatnot, it's not that the calculus formulas are secret. We have them written everywhere. We got books show you how to do it. But you just have to understand a whole bunch of other stuff first before this on this level begins to make sense, even though it was built from more primitive concepts. And so it's public, you have access to it. However, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to know. So these higher mathematical equations are technically esoteric because only a few people know and understand them. But that doesn't mean that the information is secret, that you can't know about it. And that's a fundamental hurdle that, conceptually a lot of people have to realize.
Okay.
Yeah, and
even with the metonation, like what I did today, I can demonstrate, just based on the text, that Maat has to do with breath and air. Most people, don't equate her beforehand, but they didn't have the tools of the language. And so now I could go back into the ancient Egyptian and be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on now. And it won't be spooky, and I don't have to say that the Anunnaki came to me in my dream and gave me the sacred information. I can show you step by step just how I did on how I came to my conclusion. And you can follow it. And if you can come up with a step better that can, enhance or prove wrong my method, then that's what it is. That's what science is about, But I've demonstrated for the fact. I don't have to lean on that I belong to this particular tradition. Because regardless, it's going to come out in the language. As they say, it's going to come out in the wash. It's going to come out in the language. So what you're calling esoteric and secret is just that you don't know the language. And so the ancient Egyptians weren't counting on historical comparative linguistics, even if they did have, secret stuff.
And I say this all the time in regards to esoteric when it comes to Egyptian texts and things. It's almost like I always go into this thing about figurative language. Figurative language encompasses all the different genres underneath it, such as metaphors, similes, hyperboles, allegories, and all of the other terms that you could think of. And these are literary devices that we call them that today, figurative language. Even hip hop raps are basically whoever can think of the nicest metaphors, and things like that. But you have to be embedded in the culture to have it anchored into something real in order to get it. So if you're not, into that, then it's going to be outside of your reach in terms of comprehension. So that becomes the figurative stuff becomes so-called quote unquote esoteric, but it's not that it's secret. It's similar to what basically what Asar was saying. But I always like to input into the conversation the figurative aspect of how things were written, and we discussed this before about oral societies or oral communities, they had to have some kind of technology, for lack of a better word, or method in order to document and save and record these concepts and even the very words themselves. So figurative, what we call figurative language now, was basically just an ancient natural technology of communication and articulating things on especially when it comes to the hard, what we call hard sciences, such as studying astronomy, studying engineering, and these different things. It's kind of no different than now. Like, for example, a lawyer will have a whole set of terminology and definitions that are different than a regular lay person, but what a lawyer knows is not secret. It's I see Unc just when I came back in, but it's not secretive. It's just that they deal with a certain level of information that the average person is not going to take time to get into, may not have any interest in, or just their path of life just doesn't require it. You know what I'm saying? So I those are kind of things I always add to that discussion.
I want to, and I hate to cut this aspect of the conversation short, but it's already been about 2.5 hours. So I really ideally wanted to be an hour, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. I don't even know why I even suggested it. But I'm trying to keep it digestible so people can view it in one sitting. So I'm just going to end the conversation, at least the live conversation. And I just want to thank everyone for listening, and thank our panel for coming in, joining with their questions and insights or whatnot. And for those who will be watching in the future, leave a comment. If you have a question, you can hit me up on my website, asarimhotep.com, or you can hit me up on Facebook. Just search for asarimhotep.com on my public page, or just leave a comment or ask a question in the comments, and I'll answer it as best as I can there. So, just hit me up. Again, the fuller article will be available sometime in the future. I can't give you an exact date, but just be on the lookout. And once again, thank you. I enjoyed y'all presence, and y'all have a blessed night. It's a little after midnight here, so got to get ready for the next day. But appreciate y'all, love and light, and until next time, Hotep.